Abigail Reed pressed her father's last letter against her chest and ran through the rain until her lungs burned, because the men who killed him were already calling it an accident. She had no money, no allies, and no proof. Only a name written in her father's shaking hand the night before he died. If you've ever watched a good man be destroyed by powerful people who never faced a single consequence, this story is for you. Subscribe. Now drop your city in the comments and don't you dare look away. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Abigail Reed knew something was wrong before she even broke the seal, because her father, Judge Elias Reed, the most methodical man she had ever known, had addressed the envelope in handwriting she barely recognized. Shaky, rushed. The letters crowding each other like men trying to escape a burning room. She read it standing in the kitchen of their small house in Fredericksburg, still in her apron, flour on her hands from the bread she would never finish baking. Abigail. If anything happens to me before we speak, go to Blackwood Ridge. Ask for no one. Trust no one. Find the ledger. That was all he wrote. 3 lines. No signature. No explanation. And at the bottom of the page, pressed so hard the pen had nearly torn through the paper, a single name, Victor Hawthorne. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. 2 hours later, the sheriff's deputy knocked on her door and told her that her father's carriage had gone off the ridge road in the storm the previous night. The horse had panicked. The axle had broken. A terrible accident, the deputy said. Deeply sorry for her loss. He didn't take his hat off when he said it. Abigail looked at him for a long moment. Which ridge? She asked. The deputy blinked. Ma'am, which ridge road? My father traveled 4 different routes between Fredericksburg and the county courthouse. Which road was he on? The deputy's jaw tightened. The North Pass, ma'am. Why does it? My father never took the North Pass in a rainstorm, Abigail said. He said the drainage made the shoulder soft. He said it every time I rode with him. He hadn't taken that road in wet weather in 11 years. The deputy said nothing. Abigail held the door open. Thank you for coming. She buried her father on a Thursday in the churchyard behind the Methodist congregation he had attended every Sunday for 30 years. 12 people came. Half of them were courthouse clerks who owed her father favors and looked uncomfortable about it. The minister spoke well. The sky was the flat pale white of old bone. She didn't cry until she was alone. Then she cried until there was nothing left. On Friday morning, she packed a single bag, retrieved every dollar she had saved over 4 years of teaching the Hargrove children their letters, and hired the cheapest available seat on a northbound post coach. She was going to Blackwood Ridge. She was going to find the ledger. And if Victor Hawthorne's name was in it, the way her gut told her it was, she was going to burn that man's entire world down around him, legally, publicly, and completely. Blackwood Ridge sat at the end of a long private road, lined with white oak trees, so old their roots had buckled the packed dirt into ridges and valleys. The main house was large and well kept, the kind of house that had been built with money and maintained with discipline. There were horses in the paddock. There were hands moving through the yard with the quiet efficiency of people who had been doing their work long enough that it no longer required conversation. Abigail climbed down from the post coach with her bag on her shoulder and stood at the edge of the property for a moment looking at it. She had never been here before. Her father had spoken of it only once, a passing reference to a man he respected, a name she hadn't retained. She wished now she had paid more attention. She walked through the front gate. A man was working near the stable entrance, his back to her, running a currycomb across the flank of a dark bay gelding with the kind of focused attention that meant he either hadn't heard her arrive or had decided not to acknowledge it. He was tall, wide through the shoulders. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, despite the summer heat, and his hands on the horse were careful, the hands of someone who understood animals well enough not to rush them. "Excuse me," Abigail said. He didn't turn immediately. He finished the stroke of the comb along the horse's shoulder, let the animal settle, and then turned to face her. She had expected a hired man. She was not prepared for the quality of attention he turned on her, steady and assessing, the kind of look that took in everything at once and filed it away without apparent effort. He had dark hair, dark eyes, and a jaw that suggested he had taken a punch or two in his life without much complaint about it. "Help you, miss," he said. "I'm looking for the house manager," Abigail said. "Or the owner. I need to speak with someone about the position." He tilted his head slightly. "What position?" "I was told there might be need of a household assistant. A letter of inquiry was sent 3 weeks ago on my behalf by Reverend Caldwell of Fredericksburg." The man studied her for a moment. Then he set the curry comb on the fence rail and wiped his hands on a cloth tucked through his belt. "That letter was received," he said. "I didn't expect the applicant to arrive unannounced." "My circumstances changed," Abigail said. "I apologize for the lack of notice." "Your name?" "Abigail Reed." Something moved behind his eyes at that quick and controlled and gone before she could identify it. "Samuel," he said. "I manage the stables and the yard. You'll want to speak with Mrs. Blackwood about the household position. She makes those decisions." "And where might I find Mrs. Blackwood?" "She'll be in the front parlor at this hour. Tell the housekeeper at the door that Samuel sent you. She'll let you through." Abigail nodded. She turned to go. "Miss Reed?" She stopped. "Did you travel alone from Fredericksburg?" "I did." A pause. "That's a long way for a woman traveling alone." "It is," Abigail agreed. She didn't elaborate. He looked at her for another moment, that same careful measuring look that she was beginning to think was simply how he processed the world. "Welcome to Blackwood Ridge," he said finally. And the way he said it was quiet enough that she couldn't tell if it was a welcome or a warning. Margaret Blackwood was 62 years old and had the posture of a woman who had decided sometime in her 40s that she would never again allow herself to be physically smaller than a situation required. She sat in a high-backed chair by the window with a cup of tea she hadn't touched and a book she wasn't reading. And she looked at Abigail with eyes so sharp they felt like a physical examination. "Elias Reed's daughter," she said. It was not a question. Abigail went very still. "You knew my father?" "I knew your father well enough to mourn him," Margaret said. "Sit down, child. You look like you've been traveling since before God woke up." Abigail sat. Margaret studied her for a long moment. Then she set the book aside and folded her hands in her lap, with the deliberate composure of someone who was about to say something that required bracing for. "Your father wrote to me," Margaret said. "6 weeks ago. He said he was close to something, that if anything happened to him, I should expect you." Abigail's throat tightened. "He told you I would come." "He told me you would need to come, which is different." Margaret picked up her tea, looked at it, set it down again. "He also said you were the most stubborn woman he had ever known, which from Elias Reed was the highest compliment he was capable of giving." Abigail looked down at her hands in her lap. "He said it was about Hawthorne," Margaret said quietly. "Yes." "And you have proof." "I have a letter. I have 11 years of my father's notes that I haven't had time to properly read yet. I have the fact that my father knew better than to take the North Pass in the rain, and that somehow he ended up on the North Pass in the rain." Abigail looked up. "And I have the fact that the deputy who came to tell me about the accident didn't know which road my father had been found on until I asked." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Victor Hawthorne is a powerful man," she said. "I know. He has friends in the state legislature. He has friends on the federal bench. He has been building those friendships for 20 years, and he is very careful about what he allows to be connected to his name." "I know that too." "You are a 22-year-old woman with a bag and a letter and a dead father," Margaret said, and her voice was not unkind. "Do you understand what you're walking into?" Abigail met the older woman's eyes directly. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said, "my father spent 30 years being the last honest man in every room he walked into. He made enemies for it. He lost opportunities for it. He died for it." She paused. "I'm not going to let that mean nothing. Whatever I'm walking into, I'm walking in." The silence stretched between them. Then Margaret Blackwood nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement that felt like something being decided rather than simply acknowledged. "The household position is yours," she said. "You'll take meals with the staff and have your own room in the East Wing." She paused. "Samuel will show you the property tomorrow. Pay attention to everything he tells you." The stable manager. Something passed across Margaret's face, brief and carefully managed. "Yes," she said. "The stable manager." That night, Abigail sat on the narrow bed in her room in the East Wing, with her father's notes spread across the quilt, reading by candlelight until her eyes burned. The notes were meticulous. Her father had been a judge for 22 years, and he had written everything down. Dates, names, amounts, decisions that didn't make sense. Given the evidence, presented cases that had been settled before they reached his courtroom by men who had no standing to settle them. The pattern emerged slowly, then all at once, like a face coming into focus through fog. Land transactions. Dozens of them. Small parcels of farmland in 3 counties acquired over a decade through foreclosures and tax seizures that her father had marked with quiet, precise notations. Insufficient notice. Procedural error. Owner not informed. Each one feeding into larger holdings. Each larger holding connected by a thin line of her father's careful handwriting to a single entity, the Hawthorne Land Trust. Victor Hawthorne had been stealing land for 10 years, using the machinery of county courts and tax boards that he controlled through appointments and debts, and the quiet, patient application of political pressure. And her father had been documenting it. She found the last entry dated 5 days before he died. "The ledger is at Blackwood Ridge. Samuel has kept it safe. If I cannot retrieve it myself, Abigail will know what to do." She read the line 3 times. Samuel has kept it safe. She thought about the stable manager with his careful hands and his measuring eyes, and the way he had gone very still when she said her name. She thought about the way Margaret Blackwood had said, "Pay attention to everything he tells you." She thought about the fact that a man who managed stables at a country estate should have had no particular reason to be keeping a federal judge's most dangerous evidence. She blew out the candle. She lay back in the darkness and listened to the summer night outside the window, the crickets, the distant movement of horses in the paddock, the creak of the old house settling around her. Samuel has kept it safe. Who was Samuel? She found out the next morning, and not the way she had planned. She had risen early before the household staff, intending to walk the property alone and get a sense of the geography before anyone was awake to observe her doing it. She pulled on her work dress and her boots and slipped out the side door of the East Wing into the cool blue-gray light of a summer morning that hadn't decided yet whether it would be beautiful or brutal. She had made it as far as the barn when she heard the voices. 2 men. One she recognized as Samuel. The other was a voice she didn't know, older and tight, with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. "You need to end this," the unknown man said. "She cannot be here, not now. You know what Hawthorne does when he thinks someone is moving against him." "I know exactly what Hawthorne does," Samuel said. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it that Abigail had not heard the day before, a kind of controlled intensity, like a fire banked down to coals. "That's why I need her here. She's Reed's daughter. She's a target the moment anyone connects her to this property. She was already a target the moment Reed died. At least here I can—" He stopped. Abigail realized a half-second too late that she had moved without meaning to, shifted her weight, her boot finding the one loose board in the barn's exterior wall, and the sound had been small, but the morning was very quiet. Samuel appeared in the barn doorway. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough," Abigail said. Behind him, the older man made a tight, unhappy sound. "Samuel," the man said warningly. "It's all right, Hendricks," Samuel said without taking his eyes off Abigail. "Give us a moment." The man Hendricks appeared briefly in the doorway beside Samuel, looked at Abigail with an expression that suggested he found her existence deeply inconvenient, and disappeared back into the barn. Samuel stepped outside. They stood in the cool morning air 3 feet apart and looked at each other. "You're not the stable manager," Abigail said. "No," he said. "My father's notes say Samuel has been keeping a ledger safe, a ledger documenting 10 years of Victor Hawthorne's land fraud." She paused. "That Samuel is you." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes." "Who are you?" He looked at her steadily. "Samuel Blackwood. This is my property." The name landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. Blackwood. The man her father had trusted. The man who had been holding the evidence that could destroy Victor Hawthorne, who had been holding it for God knew how long and saying nothing. "Why?" she said. "Why have you been hiding? Why are you pretending to work your own stables? What are you waiting for?" "Enough," he said. "Enough what?" "Enough to be certain. Enough that it can't be dismissed or bought away or quietly buried." His jaw was tight. "Your father and I had been building this case for 2 years, Miss Reed. 2 years of careful, documented, airtight evidence. We were close. We were—" He stopped, looked away, looked back. "We were close when they killed him." The word killed sat between them in the morning air without apology or softening. "You know it wasn't an accident," Abigail said. "I know it wasn't an accident. And you're still here, still hiding, still waiting. Because if I move too soon, Hawthorne destroys everything and walks away clean." His voice was flat and certain. "I've watched him do it before. He did it to the Mercer family in 1814. He did it to Judge Collins in 1816. He is very good at making things disappear, and very good at making men who threaten him disappear along with them." He looked at her directly. "Your father knew the risk. He took it anyway because he believed we were close enough that it was worth taking. And now he's dead, and the ledger is still here, and I am not going to let his death mean nothing." The last sentence came out harder than the rest, raw and briefly unguarded, and he seemed to know it because something moved across his face and was controlled and put away. Abigail looked at him for a long moment. "The ledger," she said. "I need to see it." "I know." "Today." "I know." He glanced toward the house, then back at her. "Not yet. Hawthorne has eyes everywhere. We need to be careful about when and how." He paused. "Can you wait one day?" She thought about her father's handwriting shaky and rushing across the page in the last letter he ever wrote her. She thought about a carriage going off the North Pass in the rain. She thought about a deputy who hadn't taken his hat off. "One day," she said. Samuel Blackwood nodded. He turned to go back into the barn and then stopped. "Miss Reed." She waited. "Your father was the most honest man I've known in my life," he said without turning around. "I want you to know that. Whatever happens next, he was worth knowing." He went inside. Abigail stood alone in the blue morning light, her father's words running through her head like water through a channel that had been dug too deep to fill. The truth does not need powerful friends. It only needs brave people. She straightened her shoulders. She walked back to the house. The ledger was smaller than Abigail had expected. She had spent the entire day waiting for it, moving through her household duties with mechanical efficiency, carrying linens and polishing silver, and answering Mrs. Blackwood's quiet questions about the Fredericksburg household staff, all while her mind ran and ran and ran over everything Samuel had told her that morning. She had expected something monumental. Something that looked like the weight it carried. What Samuel set on the table in front of her that evening was a plain brown notebook, no larger than a family Bible, its cover water-stained at one corner, and its spine cracked from years of use. "That's it," she said. "That's it," Samuel said. They were in the back room of the tack house, the one room on the property. Samuel had explained that Hawthorne's man wouldn't think to search because it smelled like leather oil and horse sweat and contained nothing that looked valuable. Hendricks stood by the door with his arms crossed and his expression making clear that he still considered Abigail's presence a significant tactical error. She opened the ledger. The handwriting inside was not her father's. It was tighter, more angular. The handwriting of a man who had trained himself to write small, to conserve paper, or perhaps to make documents harder to read at a distance. Samuel's handwriting, she guessed. Columns of dates and names and amounts cross-referenced with county parcel numbers and court filing dates and the names of the judges who had signed off on each transaction. She turned pages slowly. Then she stopped. "These families," she said. "The Hendersons, the Pruitt family, the Wards." She looked up. "I know some of these names. My father cited these cases when he was arguing for procedural reform and county foreclosures. He said they were examples of systemic failure. He never said—" She stopped. "He never said he knew who was behind it." "He knew," Samuel said. "He'd known for longer than he let on, I think. He was careful about what he said out loud until he was sure he had enough to survive saying it." "How long have you been building this?" "I started in 1815, Samuel said. "After the war. I came home from the frontier and found out that 3 families on adjoining land had lost their properties to tax seizures while I was gone. Men I'd known since childhood. Their families had been on that land for 40 years. His jaw was tight. "The seizures were legal on paper. Everything Hawthorne does is legal on paper. That's what makes him so dangerous. He doesn't break the law. He owns enough of the machinery of the law that he bends it to whatever shape he needs." Abigail turned another page. Another column of names. Another column of amounts. Another column of dates. And then near the back of the book in handwriting she recognized immediately, because she had been reading it by candlelight less than 24 hours ago, 3 pages in her father's hand. She pressed her fingers flat against the page. "He wrote in the ledger," she said. "He brought additional documentation when he came in March," Samuel said quietly. "Court records. Internal correspondence he'd obtained through a clerk who owed him a debt. He added it to the back of the ledger himself." Abigail read. Her father's notes were as always precise and methodical and utterly without sentimentality. Names, dates, cross-references. A careful accounting of transactions that should not have been possible without judicial cooperation. And at the end, a single paragraph separate from the columns written in a slightly different hand as if he'd come back to add it later. VH aware of documentation. Source within county courthouse. Move timeline forward. Tell Samuel if Reed cannot complete Reed's daughter will. She knows what to look for. Abigail read the last line twice. Her father had known someone was going to tell Hawthorne. He had known, and he had kept working anyway. And he had written her name in a ledger as his contingency plan, and not told her any of it. "He didn't warn me," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Samuel was quiet for a moment. "He didn't want to scare you." "He should have scared me," she said. "He should have—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, looked back at the ledger. "He should have let me help him. He was protecting you." "He died protecting me," Abigail said. "And now I'm here anyway. So all he managed to do was make sure I arrived after instead of during." The silence in the tack house was the kind that had weight to it. Hendricks cleared his throat from his post by the door. "Someone's coming up the south road." Samuel was on his feet before the sentence finished. He crossed to the single small window and looked out, and something in his posture changed, a tightening, a consolidation, the particular stillness of a man who has just confirmed a threat he was already expecting. "Corbett," he said. "Hawthorne's man," Hendricks said. "Hawthorne's man." Samuel turned from the window. He looked at Abigail. "Give me the ledger." She closed it and handed it across without argument. Samuel crossed to the far wall, pressed on a specific board with the heel of his hand, and the board swung inward to reveal a narrow cavity, barely 6 inches deep, but long enough to hold the ledger flat. He placed it inside and pressed the board back into place, and by the time he was done, it looked like every other wall in the room. "You came out here to check on the gray mare," Samuel said to Abigail. "She's been favoring her left foreleg. I was showing you how to apply the poultice." "All right," Abigail said. "You're a household assistant doing a favor for the stable manager. That's all you are." "I understand." He looked at her for one brief, direct moment. "Don't let him ask you questions. If he asks, you don't know anything about anything except linens and tea service. I've been doing that my whole life, Abigail said. Something moved across his face that might have been the beginning of a smile, and decided against it at the last moment. Corbett was a narrow man with a pleasant face that Abigail distrusted immediately. He rode a good horse and wore good clothes and spoke with the easy, unhurried confidence of someone who had never in his life needed to wonder whether a room was safe to walk into. He explained to Samuel at the stable entrance, passing through on Senator Hawthorne's business, surveying the properties along the North Road for a proposed land improvement initiative. The senator is very committed to the development of this region, Corbett said. He was looking at Samuel, but his eyes kept sliding to Abigail with the particular quality of attention that pretended not to be attention. As are all men of good standing in this district, I'm sure. Blackwood Ridge supports fair development, Samuel said. His voice was easy and unhurried and gave away absolutely nothing, of course. Corbett smiled. He looked at Abigail directly for the first time. I don't believe we've met, miss. Abigail, she said. I'm with the household staff. New. Just arrived. From Fredericksburg, she said, and watched his face. The reaction was small, a fraction of a second's pause, a slight recalibration behind his eyes, but it was there. He knew her name, or he knew her father's name, or both. Lovely town, Corbett said pleasantly. I hope you find Blackwood Ridge agreeable. He tipped his hat to her and turned back to Samuel. I won't take more of your time. Give my regards to Mrs. Blackwood. He rode away. Abigail kept her face composed until he was out of earshot. He knew who I was, she said quietly. Yes, Samuel said just as quietly, which means Hawthorne already knows I'm here. It means Hawthorne suspected you might come here and now has confirmation. Samuel watched the road where Corbett had disappeared. It changes our timeline. How much? We have less time than I thought. He turned to look at her. A week, maybe 10 days. After that, Hawthorne will stop gathering information and start taking action. What kind of action? Samuel's expression was level and honest and not particularly comforting. The kind he took with your father. That night, Abigail could not sleep. She lay in the narrow bed in the east wing and listened to the house and ran the ledger through her mind. The names, the dates, the columns of numbers that added up to 10 years of stolen land and broken families, and a legal system quietly, patiently corrupted from the inside. She thought about Corbett's eyes sliding to her face and the tiny pause when she said Fredericksburg. She thought about the North Pass and the rain and a carriage that had gone off a road her father never should have been on. She got up. She was 3 steps from her door when she heard a sound from the floor below, faint but wrong. Not the house settling. Not a servant moving through their nighttime routine. Something deliberate and quiet in the particular way that deliberate things tried to sound accidental. She stood very still. The sound moved toward the east wing staircase. Abigail looked at her door, then at the window, then back at the door. She had no weapon. She had her father's letter in her bag and her own good sense and very little else. She picked up the fire iron from beside the small hearth. The footsteps reached the top of the stair. They moved along the corridor. They stopped outside her door. Abigail stood to the side of the door frame, not in front of it, where someone opening the door quickly would immediately see her, and held the fire iron in both hands and breathed through her nose and thought with a clarity that surprised her that she was not afraid. She was angry. There was a difference. The door opened. A figure stepped inside. Abigail raised the iron. Don't, said Samuel's voice. She held position for 1 more second, then lowered the iron, and the breath she released was the first one she'd taken fully in about 90 seconds. Samuel stood in her doorway with a small lamp and an expression that reassessed her comprehensively upward. You were going to hit me, he said. I was going to hit whoever came through that door, she said. You came through that door. Ooh, fair, he allowed. He stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind him. He was still dressed boots on coat on the look of a man who hadn't tried to sleep. He held something out to her, a folded piece of paper. She took it. It was left in the barn, he said, on the gate of the gray mare's stall. Corbett didn't leave it. The handwriting is different. Someone who was already on the property. She unfolded it. 3 words. Stop. Or else. She stared at the words for a long moment. Someone on the property, she said. Someone in the household, or someone who knew the property well enough to move through it in the dark, Samuel said. Which means Hawthorne has had someone in place here for longer than Corbett's visit today. Who? I don't know yet. His jaw was tight. I have suspicions. I need to confirm them before I act on it. Who do you suspect? He looked at her steadily. I'd rather not say until I'm certain. If I'm wrong, I've accused someone unfairly. If I'm right, and you know you might react differently around them and they'll notice. She wanted to argue with that. She recognized after a moment that he was right. All right, she said. What do I do? For tonight, nothing. Don't leave this room. Don't open this door unless you hear my voice or my mother's. He paused. Can you do that? I've been doing things far more difficult than staying in a room, she said. I know. He said it simply without qualification or condescension, and it landed differently because of that, like something being acknowledged rather than managed. You're your father's daughter. I can see that. Abigail looked at him in the lamplight. He trusted you, she said. He did. I want to trust you, she said. I'm not there yet, but I want to be. Samuel was quiet for a moment. That's honest, he said. I'm my father's daughter, she said. He looked at her with something that was not quite a smile and not quite sadness, but had elements of both. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow is going to be harder than today. He left. She locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed with the threatening note in her hands and her father's voice running through her memory, steady and certain the way it had always been even when he was scared. Brave Abigail, that's all it takes. Brave is all. Morning came with bad news already in it. She heard it before she was fully awake, raised voices from the direction of the kitchen, and then Margaret Blackwood's voice cutting through them like a blade, cold and precise. Abigail dressed quickly and came downstairs to find the kitchen staff clustered near the back door, and Margaret standing in the middle of the room with her spine very straight and her face doing the thing Abigail was coming to recognize, that careful management of an emotion too dangerous to let out. What happened? Abigail said. One of the kitchen girls, young red-eyed, pointed out the back window. The storehouse was gone, not damaged, not broken into. Gone, reduced overnight to a smoldering foundation and the smell of ash that had been burning for hours before anyone smelled it or saw the light. Every preserved food supply for the estate's winter stores. Every salted barrel. Every bushel of grain. A season's worth of provision. Burned to the ground. Abigail stood at the back door and looked at the ruin of it, and felt something go cold and fixed inside her chest. A warning, she said. An escalation, Samuel said from behind her. He was already dressed, already steady in the particular way he went steady when things were bad, that compressed internal quiet. This wasn't Corbett. This took planning. Someone knew where the stores were kept, knew how to avoid the dogs, knew how to set a fire that would burn completely before it was noticed. The same someone who left the note, Abigail said. Yes. She turned to face him. Samuel, who is it? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Dawes. She recognized the name, the estate's senior groundskeeper, a quiet man in his 50s who had nodded to her twice since her arrival and said approximately 6 words in her presence. How long? She asked. I think since last spring, Samuel said. I found discrepancies in the supply records 3 months ago. I couldn't prove it. I should have moved faster. You couldn't have known what he'd do. I could have been more careful, he said, and the weight of it in his voice made clear that he was not interested in being absolved of it, not yet, not until the damage was assessed and accounted for. Margaret appeared at his shoulder. "The hands are shaken," she said quietly. "If Dawes has been reporting to Hawthorne, then Hawthorne knows every conversation held on this property for the past 6 months. Everything Samuel has done, everyone who has visited." She paused. "Everyone who has arrived." She looked at Abigail when she said it. Abigail looked back. "He's known I was coming since before I arrived," she said. "My father's letter to you, Dawes, could have read it or reported it." "Yes," Margaret said. "Which means everything we've done since I arrived, every conversation, every movement he may know." "Not everything," Samuel said. "The tack house is a place Dawes avoids. He has a sensitivity to horses' respiratory. He doesn't enter that building." A pause. "The ledger is still safe." The ledger is still safe. Abigail held on to that fact the way her father had probably held on to it in the last months of his life, when everything else was coming undone. The ledger was still safe. That meant there was still something to fight with. "All right," she said. She looked at Samuel, then at Margaret, then back at Samuel. "We moved the timeline. We can't wait another week. Hawthorne is already acting. We need to find whoever my father intended to bring his evidence to. Whoever he trusted on the federal side to receive this and act on it without Hawthorne buying them first." She paused. "My father's notes mention a name. A congressman. Alderman Graves of the Richmond district. My father wrote that Graves had been asking questions about county land practices independently before my father ever approached him. He wrote that Graves was clean." Samuel went very still. "Graves," he said. "You know him." "I know of him. I also know that 2 weeks ago, someone attempted to deliver a forged letter to Graves's office, a letter purportedly from a federal judge accusing Graves of financial impropriety. The attempt failed because Graves's aide recognized the seal was wrong." Samuel looked at her. "Hawthorne was already trying to neutralize Graves before we could reach him." The information settled over Abigail like cold water. Hawthorne was always one step ahead. He had been one step ahead for 10 years. He had been one step ahead of her father. "Then we have to move faster than he expects us to," she said. "He thinks he's frightened us. The fire the note Corbett's visit, he thinks we're retreating. He's waiting for us to go quiet." She met Samuel's eyes. "We don't go quiet." Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Behind him, Margaret Blackwood made a sound quiet and fierce and proud all at once. "She's Elias Reed's daughter," Margaret said. "I told you." Samuel said nothing. But the way he looked at Abigail, steady and certain, and something else, something that he kept carefully behind his eyes, said more than words would have anyway. They moved Dawes off the property by noon. Samuel did it quietly and without ceremony, called the man into the yard, told him his services were no longer required, and handed him 2 weeks' wages in an envelope. Dawes took the envelope without looking at it. He looked at Samuel for a long moment, with an expression that was not quite guilt, and not quite defiance, but something in between the face of a man who had made a calculation and was not yet certain whether it had been the right one. "You'll want to be gone before dark," Samuel said. Dawes left. Abigail watched from the east wing window and felt no satisfaction in it. "A spy removed" was a message sent to Dawes and through Dawes to Hawthorne. The senator would know within 24 hours that Samuel had identified the source. He would know that Blackwood Ridge was no longer operating blind. And a man who had been running 10 years of careful patient corruption did not receive that kind of message and sit still. "He'll move now," she told Samuel that afternoon in the tack house. "Hawthorne, he'll know we found Dawes. He'll know we're not frightened. He'll stop being careful." "That's what we need him to do," Samuel said. She looked at him. "Explain that." "For 2 years Hawthorne has been untouchable because he's patient. He waits. He watches. He builds legal scaffolding around everything he does, so that by the time anyone looks at it, the illegality is 3 layers deep and requires a judge to unwrap." Samuel spread the ledger open on the workbench between them. But patient men get impulsive when they feel cornered. And impulsive men make mistakes they wouldn't make otherwise. We need him to make a mistake. And if he makes a move against us before he makes a mistake, then we deal with that too. That's not a plan, Samuel. It's the beginning of one. He looked at her directly. The plan is Graves. We get the ledger to Congressman Graves before Hawthorne can neutralize him. Graves takes it to the House Committee on Federal Land Practices. There's an inquiry already open. Your father knew about it. That's why Graves was the target. The committee subpoenas Hawthorne's records, and Hawthorne's carefully constructed legal scaffolding becomes the very thing that hangs him because it's all documented. Abigail was quiet for a moment, working through it. Getting the ledger to Graves means someone traveling to Richmond, she said. Yes. And anyone who leaves this property right now is visible. Hawthorne will have men on the road. Yes. So how do we get it there? Samuel looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Hendricks leaves tomorrow morning on a supply run to Culpeper. It's a regular route. He makes it every 3 weeks. Hawthorne's people know it. They won't look twice at him. From Culpeper, he can take a different road south to Richmond without anyone connecting it to us. He paused. He carries the ledger wrapped in oilcloth inside a flour sack. He delivers it to Graves's aide personally, a man named Foster, who your father trusted and who Hendricks has met before. And if Hawthorne searches the supply wagon, then Hendricks says he's carrying household supplies, which he is, and we lose the ledger. Samuel's jaw was tight. It's a risk. Everything from this point forward is a risk. I know. Abigail looked down at the ledger, the plain, battered, water-stained book that her father had trusted more than his own life, apparently. I want to copy the key pages first, before Hendricks takes it. If the ledger is lost or destroyed, I want documentation that survives separately. Samuel looked at her. That'll take most of the night, he said. Then I'd better start now, she said. She copied for 6 hours. Margaret brought her a lamp and didn't ask questions. Samuel came in twice, once to bring her bread and cold meat that she ate without tasting, once to read over her shoulder for 10 minutes in silence before leaving again. Her hand cramped. She switched hands and kept writing. The summer night was hot, and the tack house held the heat badly, and her dress was sticking to her back, and none of it mattered at all. Her father's handwriting was at the back of the ledger. She copied his pages last, and she was careful with them, more careful than with anything else, because these were the pages in which Elias Reed had written, in his precise, methodical hand, the thing that had gotten him killed. She finished at 3 a.m. She folded her copies into a separate oilcloth packet and handed the original ledger to Samuel. Keep your copies somewhere separate from mine, he said. I'll give them to your mother, Abigail said. Hawthorne's men won't search her rooms. They'd have to be willing to physically confront a 62-year-old woman in her own house, and men like Corbett don't do that. Samuel looked at her with that expression again, the one that reassessed. My mother is going to like you, he said. Your mother already likes me, Abigail said. She told me this morning that I reminded her of herself at 22, which I took as a compliment, and I'm fairly certain she intended it as a warning. This time, he did smile, brief and real, and surprised, out of him, the kind that didn't have time to be managed first. Abigail felt the warmth of it move through her like the first genuine warm thing in 2 very cold weeks. Then she picked up her lamp and went to find Margaret. Hendricks left at dawn with the ledger in a flour sack under the wagon seat. Abigail stood in the yard and watched him go and made herself breathe steadily. Either the ledger reached Richmond or it didn't. Either Graves received it or he didn't. Either the case her father had spent 2 years building became the thing that brought Hawthorne down, or it disappeared the way everything else had disappeared, quietly, cleanly, with no one held accountable. She couldn't control it now. She went inside and started her household duties. She was in the middle of cataloging the damaged stores from the fire, making a meticulous written record of every lost item for insurance and legal purposes, which was useful work that also happened to give her access to estate documents without anyone thinking it unusual when Molly, the youngest kitchen maid, appeared at her elbow. "Miss Abigail," Molly said low and quick. There's a man at the side gate. He's not from around here. He's asking for you by name." Abigail went very still. "What does he look like?" "Old, maybe 50, wearing a brown coat. He said—" Molly hesitated. "He said he has a message from someone named Collins." Collins. Abigail knew that name. Her father's notes had mentioned a Judge Collins, a man Hawthorne had destroyed in 1816. She'd assumed Collins was gone, disgraced and discredited, and removed from the picture. She had apparently assumed wrong. "Tell him I'll come to the side gate in 5 minutes," Abigail said. "Don't mention it to anyone else." She found Samuel first. "Collins is alive," Samuel said, and he said it the way a man said something he'd believed was one thing and had just discovered was another. Apparently. Or someone is using his name. Abigail looked at him steadily. "I'm going to the gate." "Not alone." "You can't come with me visibly. If Hawthorne has eyes on the property, Samuel Blackwood walking to the side gate to meet a stranger is information we don't want sent back to Richmond." "Then I come at a distance," he said. "You don't go alone." She didn't argue. The man at the gate was exactly as Molly had described, old, unremarkable, wearing a brown coat that had seen better years. He had the particular quietness of someone who had been frightened for a long time, and had made a kind of uneasy peace with it. He looked at Abigail the way people looked at someone they had heard described and were now calibrating against the description. "You're Reed's daughter," he said. "I am." "I'm Collins." He looked past her briefly, scanning the yard with automatic caution. "I heard you were here. I've been 3 days deciding whether to come." "What made you come?" "They killed your father," Collins said flatly. "He was the only honest judge left in the whole state. I'm not—" He stopped. His voice had cracked slightly, and he controlled it. "I couldn't do nothing again. Not again." "What do you mean, again?" Collins looked at her directly. "In 1816, I had evidence against Hawthorne," he said. "Land fraud. A clerk I'd turned 3 witnesses enough to bring a case. I was preparing to file." He paused. "Hawthorne came to my house. Not Corbett, not a messenger. Hawthorne himself. He sat in my parlor and had tea, and told me very pleasantly that my son was enrolled at the Virginia Military Institute, and that it would be a shame if questions arose about the young man's character. Then he left." Collins's voice was flat and controlled and terrible. "I dropped the case. I resigned my judgeship. I've spent the last 3 years convincing myself I had no choice." He looked at Abigail. "I had a choice." Abigail absorbed this. "What are you bringing me?" she said. Collins reached inside his coat and produced a folded document, heavy paper, official-looking, sealed with what had once been a wax seal that had been carefully opened and resealed. "It's a letter," he said, "written by Hawthorne to his land agent in 1814, instructing the agent to falsify the procedural notice on the Henderson foreclosure, in Hawthorne's own hand with his personal seal." He held it out. "I took it from his files when I resigned. I've kept it for 3 years because I was afraid, and because I told myself it wasn't enough." He paused. "It's enough." Abigail took the letter. She unfolded it carefully. She read it. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was a sitting senator instructing a subordinate to commit fraud in a federal land proceeding in his own handwriting under his own seal. It was the one thing the ledger couldn't provide on its own direct evidence in Hawthorne's own words of knowing participation. "Why now?" she said. "Why come to me?" "Because your father died," Collins said simply. "And because I have been a coward long enough that I've forgotten what it felt like to be anything else." He paused. "Your father came to me last spring. He asked me if I still had anything from the 1816 case. I told him no." Another pause. "I lied to him. I was still afraid." His voice dropped. "He died 6 weeks later. The silence between them was full of things that couldn't be undone. Your son," Abigail said. "Is he still at the Institute?" "He graduated last year. He's been commissioned." Collins's expression was the complicated grief of a man who had done the wrong thing for the right reason, and would never entirely forgive himself for it. He's safe now, or as safe as anyone is. If you testify to the existence of this letter, Abigail said, Hawthorne will come after you. I know. He doesn't play gently with people who've crossed him. I know that too. Collins looked at her steadily. I'm 61 years old, Miss Reed. I have a bad heart and a good conscience, and I am very tired of those two things being in conflict with each other. He paused. I want to testify. I want to stand in front of a committee and say what I know and what I have and what I let happen in 1816 because I was afraid. I want to say all of it. His jaw set. Your father deserved better from me when he was alive. This is the only thing I can still give him. Abigail's throat tightened. She thought about her father's handwriting shaking across the page of that last letter. She thought about 12 people at a funeral. She thought about a deputy who hadn't taken his hat off. Come inside, she said. There's someone you need to meet. Samuel read the letter standing up and said nothing for 45 seconds, which was the longest 45 seconds Abigail had yet spent in his presence. Then he set it down on the workbench and looked at Collins. You've had this for 3 years, he said. Yes, Collins said. A pause. Why didn't you come to me? You knew your father knew me. Reed told you about Blackwood Ridge. I was afraid of you, too, Collins said plainly. You're a powerful man, Mr. Blackwood. I had no reason to believe you were any different from the rest. Samuel was quiet for a moment. That's fair, he said. I don't blame you for that. He looked down at the letter again. This combined with the ledger, this is a case. This is a real case. Graves takes this to the committee. The committee has no choice but to open a full inquiry. Hawthorne can't buy his way out of his own handwriting. There's more, Collins said. Both Samuel and Abigail looked at him. I know where the original deed records are, Collins said. The ones from the Henderson and Pruitt cases. The official records show the foreclosures as procedurally sound. But the originals, the ones that existed before Hawthorne's agent altered them, those originals were supposed to be destroyed. They weren't. He paused. I know where they are. I've known for 3 years. Samuel put both hands flat on the workbench. Where? He said. The Norwood County Records Office, Collins said. Basement storage. There's a crate marked 1809 flood damage surplus county materials supposed to have been destroyed in a fire in 1815. The fire happened. The crate didn't burn because someone moved it beforehand. Someone who was keeping it as insurance against Hawthorne in case Hawthorne ever turned on them. He paused. The someone was Hawthorne's original land agent. He died in 1817 and never told anyone. I found out about the crate from his widow, who had no idea what was in it. The silence in the tack house was the kind that preceded something large moving. Abigail looked at Samuel. Samuel looked back at her. The Norwood Records Office, she said. That's 40 miles. 38, Samuel said. He straightened. His eyes were very clear and very focused. And it's in the county where Hawthorne's influence is weakest. It's the one jurisdiction he's never fully penetrated, because the county clerk there is an old man with no debts and no ambitions and no children to threaten. Can we get someone there before Hawthorne does? If we move tonight, Samuel said, before Dawes has time to fully report to Hawthorne, and before Hawthorne has time to react. He was already thinking through it. She could see it the way his attention organized itself into a problem and began solving. Hendricks is on the road south. I go east to Norwood. You stay here with my mother and Collins. No, Abigail said. He looked at her. You need someone to identify the specific documents, she said. You know the ledger, but you haven't read my father's full notes. I have. I know exactly which deed records we're looking for, which filing dates, which case numbers. You could spend 4 hours in that basement and pull the wrong crates. She held his gaze. I'm coming. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Collins. Can you ride? Badly, Collins said. But yes, you'll stay with my mother, Samuel told him. She'll keep you safe and you'll keep the letter safe, if we're not back in 48 hours. I'll get the letter to Graves myself, Collins said. However I have to. Samuel nodded. He looked at Abigail. There was something in his expression that she was beginning to recognize. Not worry exactly, but a particular quality of attention that meant he was aware of her in a way that had moved some distance past professional. He managed it quickly, but not quickly enough. "We leave at nightfall," he said. "I'll be ready," she said. She was already at the door when his voice stopped her. "Abigail." She turned. He said it quietly and without decoration. "We're going to finish this. What your father started. We're going to finish it." She looked at him across the room, this man who had hidden himself on his own property, for reasons she was only beginning to fully understand, who had spent 2 years building a case that kept almost being enough, who had said her father was the most honest man he'd known, as if it was something he carried rather than something he remembered. "I know," she said, and for the first time since she had read that shaking letter in her kitchen in Fredericksburg, she believed it. They rode out at nightfall with no lantern and no conversation. Samuel set the pace steady and controlled fast enough to cover ground, careful enough not to exhaust the horses before they reached Norwood. Abigail rode beside him in the dark and let the rhythm of it settle her nerves into something functional. She had ridden all her life. Her father had taught her before she could read, had said a woman who couldn't manage a horse in an emergency was a woman at the mercy of whatever emergency found her. She had never been more grateful for that lesson than she was right now, moving through a Virginia summer night with a dead man's evidence in her saddlebag and a senator's hired men somewhere on the roads ahead. They didn't speak for the first hour. Then Samuel said quietly, "Your father told me about you once." She looked at him. "We were going over the ledger. It was late. He got tired and stopped being careful about what he said." A pause. "He said you were the one thing he'd done right, that everything else he'd tried to build had been knocked down or compromised or taken from him, but you had turned out exactly as he'd hoped, and he hadn't had nearly enough to do with it." Abigail looked straight ahead at the dark road. "He never said that to me," she said. "No," Samuel said. "I don't imagine he did. Men like your father, they believe that saying the important things out loud makes them vulnerable, like they've shown someone where the door is." He paused. "I think he was wrong about that, but I understand why he was." She was quiet for a moment. "Did he know?" she asked. "At the end, do you think he knew what was coming?" Samuel didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. "He knew the risk had increased," he said finally. "He told me the last time we met that he was being followed, that he'd noticed the same rider on 2 different roads on 2 different days." He paused. "I told him to stop, to pull back and let me take the next step alone. He wouldn't." "He never pulled back from anything in his life," Abigail said. "No, he didn't." Samuel's voice was quiet. "That's what killed him, and it's also the reason we have anything worth fighting with." The road curved east. The summer dark was warm and heavy around them, full of insects and distant water and the particular closeness of Virginia woodland at night. Abigail thought about her father riding these same roads, taking careful notes, building a case one piece at a time against a man who had been dismantling honest men's lives since before she was fully grown. She thought about him writing her name in the back of a ledger as his contingency plan. She thought not for the first time that she loved him more than she had ever told him, and that she was furious with him for dying before she got the chance. "We're being followed," Samuel said. His voice was entirely level. No alarm, just information delivered the way a man delivered it, when he had already processed the alarm and moved past it. Abigail did not turn around. "Since when?" "Last 20 minutes. Single rider, staying at distance far enough back that we shouldn't have noticed. But the road curved twice and the hoof falls curved with it." A pause. "They're good. Not quite good enough." "Corbett." "Corbett's a political man. This feels like someone who knows roads." Samuel's hands were easy on the reins. "We have 2 options. We ride harder and try to lose them before Norwood, or we don't." "Or we don't," Abigail said slowly. "We let them follow us to Norwood. They report back to Hawthorne that we went to the records office. Hawthorne knows what's there or suspects. He sends men to get ahead of us. Which would tell us definitively that he knows about the Norwood crate, Samuel said. Which would tell us Collins's information is solid. And if we've just led them straight to the evidence, then we move faster than they do once we're inside. He glanced at her. Your father used to say that the best way to find out what a man is hiding is to watch what he runs toward when he thinks he's winning. Abigail thought about that for a moment. We let them follow, she said. We let them follow. Samuel agreed. The Norwood County Records Office was a 2-story brick building that smelled even from outside of old paper and river damp. The county clerk, an old man named Eustace Farrow, who looked as if he had been personally present for most of the documents he maintained, opened the door at Samuel's knock, wearing a nightcap and an expression of profound inconvenience that shifted when he recognized Samuel's face into something more complicated. Blackwood, Farrow said. Eustace, I need the basement. At this hour. At this hour. There's no time to explain the full reason, and you probably don't want to know it anyway. Samuel looked at the old man steadily. I need the 1809 flood damage crate. Surplus county materials. Farrow was quiet for a long moment. That crate shouldn't exist, he said. And yet it does, Samuel said. Samuel. Another long pause. Farrow looked at Abigail with the assessing squint of a man trying to determine whether she was an asset or a complication. Reed's daughter, he said, not a question. Yes, she said. Farrow made a sound in the back of his throat. Then he stepped back from the door. Basement stairs are on the left, he said. You've got 1 hour before I start worrying about my own hide. 30 minutes, Samuel said. That's all we need. The basement was full of the accumulated weight of 30 years of county record-keeping boxes and crates and bound stacks of documents in various states of preservation, organized according to a system that appeared to have been designed by someone who valued personal memory over external legibility. Abigail moved through it with her lamp held high and her father's case numbers running through her head like a litany. Henderson foreclosure, March 1812. Pruitt land seizure, August 1812. Ward property, November 1813. She found the crate in the back left corner exactly where Collins had said it would be under 2 other crates of actual flood-damaged materials that served as effective camouflage. It was marked in faded chalk 1809 flood surplus for disposal. She pulled it out. Samuel was beside her immediately, and together they opened it. Inside were deed records. Original deed records, the kind with official seals and witness signatures and procedural documentation that proved conclusively that the proper notices had never been given, that the owners had never been properly informed, that the foreclosures had been executed in deliberate violation of the legal protections those families were entitled to. Her father's case numbers matched. Every single one. This is it, Abigail said. Her voice came out strange, compressed tight, with something that was not quite grief and not quite triumph. This is everything. Samuel was already reading his lamp, angled over the documents, moving through them, with the focused efficiency of a man who knew exactly what he was looking at. 12 parcels, he said. All of them with procedural violations clearly documented in the originals violations that were erased in the official copies Hawthorne's agent filed with the state. He paused. This is not circumstantial. This is not a pattern that requires interpretation. This is direct primary evidence of fraud on a federal scale. We take it all, Abigail said. We take it all. He agreed. They were wrapping the documents in oilcloth when they heard the footsteps on the floor above. Not Farrow's footsteps. The old man moved with the careful shuffle of someone managing bad knees on a familiar floor. These were multiple sets of feet, moving fast and without apology, the sound of men who had stopped pretending not to be there. Samuel was on his feet in one movement. He looked at Abigail. Side door, he said. There's a delivery entrance at the back of the basement. Eustace uses it for supply deliveries. It opens onto the alley. The horses are at the front. I know. He was already moving toward the delivery entrance, the wrapped documents under his arm. We get out first. We deal with the horses after. They were halfway to the back of the basement when the door at the top of the stairs opened. A voice came down pleasant, unhurried, with the particular quality of control that came from a man who had never in his adult life been in a situation he didn't believe he could manage. "Mr. Blackwood," said Victor Hawthorne, "what a tremendous amount of trouble you have gone to." Abigail stopped moving. Samuel stopped beside her. She had never heard Hawthorne's voice before. She had imagined it had constructed it from her father's careful, neutral descriptions, from the handwriting in that letter Collins had carried for 3 years, from the shape of everything he had done. She had expected something cold, something that sounded like what it was. She had not expected it to sound reasonable. "Senator," Samuel said. His voice was completely even. "You're a long way from Richmond, as are you from Blackwood Ridge." Hawthorne descended the stairs without hurry. He was a tall man, well-dressed, carrying a lamp. Behind him came 2 men who were not well-dressed and were carrying other things. I must say, when Dawes told me about the Reed girl's arrival, I thought perhaps I was being overly cautious, sending Corbett watching the roads. A pause. I wasn't being overly cautious, was I? No, Samuel said. You weren't. Hawthorne's gaze moved to Abigail. He studied her with the same pleasant, assessing quality as everything else, the look of a man conducting an appraisal. "Miss Reed," he said, "you have your father's eyes." He had the same expression when he knew he was right about something and was trying to decide whether being right was going to be enough. "It was enough for him," Abigail said. "You just made sure he didn't live to use it." Hawthorne's expression didn't change. "Your father died in a carriage accident on the North Pass Road. I understand grief leads people to—" "Stop," Abigail said. The word came out hard and flat and without any of the deference that the situation a 22-year-old woman facing a United States senator in a basement with 2 armed men behind him might have suggested was appropriate. Hawthorne stopped. "Don't say that to my face," she said. "Don't say the word accident to me. You know what happened on that road." "I know what happened. The only question is whether you're going to be held accountable for it, and the answer to that question is yes. It's already yes. The ledger is on its way to Congressman Graves. The letter you wrote to your land agent in 1814 is with a man you thought you'd neutralized 6 years ago. And these documents—" She held the oilcloth bundle against her chest. "These documents prove that every foreclosure you ran through those county courts was fraud, documented, primary sourced, in the original official records that your agent was supposed to have destroyed and didn't." The pleasant expression on Hawthorne's face went very still. "Who?" he said. "Collins," Samuel said. "Who you should have destroyed when you had the chance, instead of just frightening." Something moved through Hawthorne's expression, a flash of calculation, of rapid reassessment of a man who had built an edifice over 10 years and was now running the numbers on how much of it was still standing. Then he looked at the 2 men behind him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Samuel moved first before the men had fully processed the instruction. Before they had fully closed the distance, he put himself between Abigail and them with a speed and economy of motion that was not the movement of a man who had spent the war years behind a desk. He caught the first man's arm, redirected the momentum, and the man went into a shelf of county records with a crash that shook the entire basement. "Run," Samuel said to Abigail. She ran. She hit the delivery door at full speed, burst through it into the warm summer night, and kept moving. The alley was narrow and dark, and she could hear shouting behind her, the crash and struggle of the basement. Hawthorne's voice sharp and stripped of pleasantness. Pharaoh yelling something from the floor above. She ran to the end of the alley and pressed herself against the wall and held the documents against her chest and breathed and listened. 30 seconds. 45. Samuel came through the delivery door at a fast walk, breathing hard, a cut above his left eyebrow bleeding freely down the side of his face. She grabbed his arm. "Are you—" "I'm fine. The documents. I have them." He looked at her just for a moment, just long enough for something to move through his expression that was not strategy and not calculation. Relief stripped down to its plainest form. "Good," he said. "We need to move. Hawthorne won't be contained long. He'll have men on the main roads within the hour." "Where do we go?" "Not back to Blackwood Ridge. Not yet." He was already moving, directing her toward the far end of the alley, away from the front of the building. "There's a farm 2 miles east the Caldwell property. Old Thomas Caldwell. He knew your father. He'll hide us until morning." They moved quickly through the back streets of Norwood, and Abigail's mind was running hard, processing everything, reorganizing everything. Hawthorne had come himself. Not Corbett. Not hired men sent blindly. Hawthorne himself had ridden to Norwood in the middle of the night because the threat had become large enough that he no longer trusted anyone else to manage it. "He's scared," she said. Samuel glanced at her without slowing. "What?" "Hawthorne came himself. He doesn't do that. Everything he does is at a distance, through intermediaries, through legal instruments. He came himself tonight." She looked at Samuel. "That means he's scared. That means he knows the case against him is real, and he's trying to close it personally before it reaches Graves." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Which means," he said slowly, "that the ledger hasn't reached Graves yet. If it had, Hawthorne would be in Richmond trying to manage the political fallout, not here chasing documents in a county basement." Abigail felt the cold move through her. "Hendricks," she said. "Hendricks should have reached Culpeper by now." Samuel said. "He should be on the Richmond road." But something in his voice was not certain, and he knew that she heard it. "What if he was stopped?" she said. "What if Hawthorne has men on the Culpeper road?" "Then Hendricks is smart enough to have found another route," Samuel said. "He's been moving goods quietly through this county for 20 years. He knows roads Hawthorne's people don't know." He believed it. Abigail could hear that he believed it. She also heard the thing underneath the thing a man carried when the plan he'd built depended on someone else's safe passage, and he had no way of knowing, not yet, whether that person was safe. She reached out and touched his arm briefly, just once, just for a moment. "He'll get through," she said. Samuel looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. "You don't know that," he said. "No," she agreed. "But my father spent 30 years making careful plans that depended on imperfect people in dangerous situations, and most of them came through." She paused. "Hendricks will come through." Samuel held her gaze in the dark for a moment. Then he nodded once, not because he was convinced, she thought, because he needed to be, and she had offered him the means to choose it. They kept moving. Tiang. Thomas Caldwell opened his door at their knock without much surprise, looked at the blood on Samuel's face and the oilcloth bundle under Abigail's arm, and said, "I wondered when Elias Reed's work was going to come knocking. He fed them cold cornbread and well water, and asked no questions, which was the most generous thing anyone had done for either of them in recent memory." Abigail sat at the old man's kitchen table with the Norwood documents spread in front of her, and went through them one more time methodically, the way her father had taught her, checking every case number against her copied notes, confirming that what they had was what Collins had promised. It was 12 parcels. 12 families. A decade of fraud documented from origin to execution in original primary records that predated every alteration Hawthorne's agent had made to the official copies. Samuel sat across from her with a cloth pressed to his forehead and watched her work. "You're counting them," he said. "I'm confirming them," she said. "My father always confirmed. He said the difference between evidence and assumption was the willingness to check the thing you already believed against the thing that was actually written down." He was right. He was usually right. She turned the last page, looked up. "It's all here. Every case. Every family." She paused. 12 families, Samuel. 12 sets of people who lost their land, their homes, their years of work, because one man needed to own the corridor between the North Road and the river for his own profit. Her voice was steady, but only just. 12 families, and my father is the only person who paid any price for it." Samuel was very quiet. "Not the only price," he said. "Not after tomorrow." She looked at him. "When Graves receives the ledger," he said, "when he receives Collins's letter, and we bring him these documents, when all of it lands on the committee desk at the same time from 3 separate sources with 3 separate chains of custody, Hawthorne cannot buy his way out. He cannot threaten his way out. He cannot make it disappear." His voice was even and certain. "He will answer for it. Every family on that list will have their case reviewed. Every fraudulent foreclosure will be challenged. It won't undo what was done, but it will be named, publicly, legally on the record." He paused. "Your father knew that was the best justice available. He thought it was worth dying for." Abigail looked at him across the table. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked, quietly, directly. "Honestly." Samuel held her gaze. "I think your father thought so," he said. "And I think he was the best judge of what was worth what that I ever knew." His voice dropped slightly. "I'm going to spend a long time deciding whether I agree with him. But right now, I'm going to make sure his answer mattered. That's the only part I can control." Outside, the summer night had softened toward the early hours of morning. Somewhere on the Richmond Road, Hendricks was riding with a flour sack under his wagon seat. Somewhere in Richmond, Congressman Graves was sleeping without knowing that by morning he would have in his possession the most significant evidence of federal land corruption in the history of the state. And somewhere not very far behind them, Victor Hawthorne was realizing that for the first time in 10 years, the thing he was chasing was moving faster than he was. Abigail folded the Norwood documents back into their oilcloth. She looked at Samuel one more time. This man who had hidden himself in his own stables, who had spent 2 years building something alone because he didn't trust anyone else to do it right, who had said her father was the most honest man he'd known in his life, and meant it as both a tribute and a wound. She thought about trust, about how her father had trusted him with the most dangerous thing he owned. She thought about the way Samuel had put himself between her and those men in the basement, without a moment's hesitation, without calculation, without anything except the immediate, instinctive refusal to let harm reach her. She wasn't ready to call it what it was. But she knew what it was. "Get some sleep," she said. "We ride for Richmond at first light." Samuel looked at her with that expression, the one that had moved past professional, and wasn't yet willing to say where it had moved to. "First light," he agreed. They rode into Richmond at mid-morning with dust on their clothes and the Norwood documents still wrapped tight in oilcloth under Abigail's arm. Thomas Caldwell had given them fresh horses before dawn, old animals slower than what they'd ridden out on, but sound enough for the distance. Samuel had said almost nothing the entire ride. Not the silence of a man with nothing to say, but the silence of a man holding everything very still inside himself, because the moment required it. Abigail understood that. She was doing the same thing. The city was already moving when they arrived. Merchants opening shutters, wagons on the main road, the ordinary noise of a summer morning that had no idea what was about to happen inside it. "Graves's office is on the north side of the Capitol building," Samuel said. "Second floor. His aide Foster arrives at 8. It's past 9 now, he'll be there." "And Hendricks?" "If he made it." Samuel's jaw was tight. "We'll know in the next 10 minutes. They tied the horses on a side street and went on foot. Abigail kept the documents against her side and walked at Samuel's pace and did not let herself think about what happened if Hendricks hadn't made it. If the ledger had been intercepted. If they were arriving at Graves's office with half a case instead of a complete one against a senator who was already awake and already moving and already one step ahead by instinct and by habit. She thought about her father instead. She thought about him sitting at his desk in Fredericksburg on the last night of his life, writing 3 lines in a shaking hand, pressing the pen hard enough to nearly tear the paper. She thought, "I'm here, Papa. I'm here." Samuel opened the door to the Capitol building. Foster was a compact, efficient man in his 30s who looked up from his desk when they walked in, and was on his feet before Abigail had taken 3 steps into the room. "Blackwood," he said. His eyes moved to Abigail. "Miss Reed." "Hendricks reached you," Samuel said. "Last night, 10 o'clock. Foster moved to the door behind him, checked the corridor, closed it again. "The ledger is with Congressman Graves right now. He's been reading since 6 this morning. He sent for the committee chairman an hour ago." He looked at the oilcloth bundle under Abigail's arm. "Is that what I think it is?" "The Norwood originals," Samuel said. "Every deed record from every fraudulent foreclosure pre-alteration primary, sourced with procedural violations intact." Foster stared at him for 1 full second. "And the Collins letter," he said. "Collins is at Blackwood Ridge with Mrs. Blackwood," Abigail said. "He's prepared to testify. He'll travel to Richmond as soon as we send word that the committee is convened." Foster pressed both hands flat on his desk and took a breath. "Do you understand what you have?" he said. "Between the ledger and that letter and these records, do you understand that this is not just a case against Hawthorne? This is a case that implicates every judge who signed off on those foreclosures, every county clerk who filed the altered records. Every." "I understand," Abigail said. "My father understood it too. That's why it took 2 years to build and why it got him killed." She set the oilcloth bundle on Foster's desk. "Which is why we need to move quickly. Hawthorne was in Norwood last night. He knows we have the originals. He'll be in Richmond by this afternoon." Foster looked at the bundle, then at Samuel, then at Abigail. "I'll take you to Graves," he said. Congressman Alderman Graves was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with the look of someone who had been in political life long enough to stop being surprised by most things, and had not yet decided whether that was an asset or a loss. He was sitting behind a large desk with the ledger open in front of him when Foster brought them in, and he looked up with an expression that Abigail read immediately and correctly as a man who had spent the last 3 hours being made angry by what he was reading. "Miss Reed," he said. He stood, which she had not expected. "I knew your father. Not well enough. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she said. "Sit down, both of you." He looked at the oilcloth bundle Foster carried in behind them. "Are those the Norwood records?" "Yes, sir," Samuel said. Graves looked at them for a long moment. Then he said, "Hawthorne has already sent a messenger to my office this morning. He's requesting an urgent meeting. He's citing a matter of, and I am quoting directly, malicious interference in federal property proceedings by parties with a personal grievance." "He's trying to get ahead of it," Samuel said. "He's trying to reframe it before I have time to form an independent view," Graves said. "Which tells me that whatever is in those records confirms what's in this ledger, and he knows it." He looked at Abigail directly. "Your father sent me a letter in April. He said he was close. He said if anything happened to him, I should expect someone to come forward with documentation." He paused. "I waited. When nothing came in the first month after his death, I assumed the evidence had been lost or destroyed." He paused again. "I am very glad to have been wrong. The evidence was never lost," Abigail said. "My father planned for every contingency. He just didn't plan for one of them being me." Something moved across Graves's face, a recognition, and something warmer underneath it. "No," he said. "I imagine he thought he was protecting you." "He was wrong about that too," she said. "But we can discuss his errors in judgment after Hawthorne is in front of your committee." Graves looked at her for a moment. Then he reached for the oilcloth bundle. "Show me the Norwood records," he said. "A moment." The next 4 hours moved with the particular quality of time that occurred when large things were being set in motion, not fast, not slow, but dense, purposeful, the weight of it pressing on every minute. Graves read. He asked questions precise, pointed the questions of a man who understood legal procedure well enough to know exactly what each document meant and what it proved. Samuel answered most of them. Abigail answered the ones about her father's notes, the ones that required knowing how Elias Reed had thought, and in what order, and why he had connected one piece of evidence to another the way he had. The committee chairman arrived at noon, a thin, formal man named Aldrich, who read for 20 minutes in silence and then said very quietly, "This is a criminal matter." "Yes," Graves said. "We need to convene formally. Full committee." Aldrich looked up. "How quickly can you produce the witness who holds the original letter?" "Collins can be in Richmond within 2 days," Samuel said. "Then we convene in 3 days," Aldrich said, "which gives us time to serve notice of inquiry to Hawthorne, and gives him exactly no time to build a legal response before he's required to appear." "He'll appear with attorneys," Graves said. "Let him," Aldrich said. "Let him bring every attorney in Virginia. None of them can explain why the original deed records say something different from the copies his agent filed with the state." He set the documents down. "This is sufficient to open a federal inquiry, more than sufficient." He looked at Samuel and then at Abigail. "Where are you staying in Richmond?" "We haven't arranged anything yet," Samuel said. "You'll stay here," Graves said. It was not a suggestion. "Both of you, until the notice is served and the committee is formally convened, you are the primary custodians of primary evidence in a federal investigation. I am not allowing either of you out of my sight." Abigail looked at Samuel. Samuel looked back at her with an expression that was the closest thing to relief she had seen on his face since she'd known him. "All right," he said. The notice was served to Hawthorne's Richmond residence at 4 o'clock that afternoon. Abigail was not there to see it delivered, but Foster was, and he came back 40 minutes later with the expression of a man who had witnessed something worth witnessing. "His face," Foster said, and paused as if the words were insufficient. He read it in the doorway. His man tried to close the door, and Hawthorne put his hand on the doorframe and just read it. All the way through. Another pause. Then he looked up and said that this was politically motivated slander, and he would have his attorneys address it. "And?" Samuel said. "And his hands were shaking," Foster said. The silence in the room after that was the specific silence of people who had been waiting a very long time for a particular thing to finally actually begin. Abigail looked down at her hands in her lap. Her father's letter was in her inside pocket, the original, the 3 shaking lines with the pressed name at the bottom. She had carried it since Fredericksburg. She had carried it through every night and every hard conversation and the basement in Norwood, and the long dark ride through the Virginia countryside. Victor Hawthorne. She thought, "He knows it's coming now, Papa. He knows." 3 days later, the committee convened. Collins arrived the morning of the hearing, thinner than she had expected, and quieter, carrying the weight of 6 years of wrong choices in the set of his shoulders. He looked at Abigail when he walked into Graves's office and said, "I should have come sooner." "You came," she said. "That's what matters now." He nodded. He didn't look entirely convinced. She thought he probably wouldn't for a long time, and that was fair, and it was his to carry, and the best thing she could give him was the chance to put it somewhere useful. She gave him that. The committee room was formal and public, and crowded in a way that official proceedings rarely were. Word had moved through Richmond in 3 days, the way word moved when it was about someone powerful, which was fast and thorough and with a particular quality of held breath. Merchants and lawyers and county officials and ordinary citizens filled the gallery. Several of them were men Abigail didn't recognize. Several more were women who looked at her with the focused, measuring attention of people who had heard a name and come to put a face to it. Hawthorne arrived with 4 attorneys and the careful composure of a man who had decided that composure was his last viable weapon. He looked at Abigail once when he entered. She looked back and did not move and did not look away. His composure flickered. Just once. Just briefly. Then he looked forward and took his seat. The committee chairman called the session to order. Graves spoke first, laying out the structure of the evidence, the timeline of the fraud, the connection between the ledger and the altered records and the original documents from Norwood. He spoke for 40 minutes with the precision of a man who had read everything 3 times and was not going to be interrupted into confusion. Hawthorne's lead attorney objected 7 times. All 7 objections were overruled. Then Collins took the stand. He was not a dramatics man. He did not perform. He sat in the witness chair and answered questions in his quiet, flat voice, and said exactly what he had done, and why he had done it, and what he had kept, and for how long, and when he was asked why he had come forward. Now he said, "Because Judge Elias Reed died for the truth, and I didn't, and I've been ashamed of that every day since." The room was very quiet after that. Hawthorne's attorney rose to cross-examine. He was good, experienced, aggressive, the kind of attorney who had dismantled witnesses before and knew how to find the thread that unraveled a testimony. He pushed Collins on the chain of custody of the letter. He pushed him on his own admitted cowardice in 1816. He tried to establish that Collins was a disgraced former judge with a personal grudge and a convenient change of heart. Collins sat through all of it without flinching. "Sir," the attorney said finally, his voice sharpening, "you've admitted that you withheld this evidence for 6 years out of personal fear. Why should this committee believe that fear has been the only thing motivating your decisions in this matter? Why should they believe you now, and not then?" Collins was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because then I was trying to protect myself, and now I'm trying to protect the truth." He paused. "I'd have thought the difference between those two things would be self-evident to a man in your profession." The gallery made a sound. The attorney sat down. Abigail was called next. She had known it was coming. She had sat with it for 3 days, the knowledge that she would stand in a formal federal proceeding and say her father's name and explain his work and present the evidence he had built. She had prepared for it the way he had taught her to prepare for anything, by reading everything twice, organizing it clearly, and trusting that the truth was simpler and more powerful than the arguments against it. She was not prepared for how it felt to stand up. Her legs were steady. Her voice was steady. But somewhere between rising from her seat and reaching the witness chair, the full weight of it landed on her father's 2 years of work. His careful handwriting, his name pressed hard enough into the paper to nearly tear it, and the 12 families on the ledger whose land and years and futures had been taken from them by a man who was sitting 15 feet away wearing his composure like armor. She sat down. She looked at Graves. She said, "My father was Judge Elias Reed of Fredericksburg. He spent the last 2 years of his life documenting what I am about to describe to this committee. He died before he could deliver that documentation himself. I am here in his place." And then she told it, all of it. She told it the way her father had taught her to tell things, starting from the documented evidence, building the pattern piece by piece, connecting each element to the next, with the logic of primary sourced fact rather than inference. She did not editorialize. She did not cry. She held the Norwood documents and read from them directly when the case numbers required it, and she cited page numbers from the ledger, and she placed Collins's letter in context with the precision of a woman who had read that letter so many times she could have recited it from memory. Hawthorne's attorney cross-examined her for 35 minutes. He found no thread to pull. There was no thread. Her father had not left any. When it was over, when she stepped down from the witness chair and walked back to her seat, she heard the gallery, and what she heard was not applause and not noise, but the particular sound of a large number of people breathing differently than they had been before. Samuel was beside her when she sat. He didn't say anything. He put his hand briefly over hers, just for a moment, just once, and then took it away. It was enough. The committee deliberated for 4 hours. They came back with a formal finding of probable cause for federal prosecution on 12 counts of land fraud, 2 counts of obstruction of federal judicial process, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit the same. Victor Hawthorne was taken into federal custody in the committee room in front of the gallery, in front of his 4 attorneys, in front of every person who had come to see what a man looked like when 10 years of careful, patient crime finally ran out of room. He looked, Abigail thought, like a man who had always believed he was too careful to be caught and had just discovered that careful was not the same thing as right. His attorneys filed objections. The objections were noted. He was taken out. What? The gallery emptied slowly, the way people left a place where something significant had happened, reluctant to fully disconnect from it, turning to say things to each other that they were still finding words for. Foster shook Samuel's hand. Aldrich said something to Graves that made Graves close his eyes briefly and nod. Collins sat for a long time in his chair without moving, and Abigail left him there because she understood that a man who had carried something for 6 years needed a minute to feel what it was like to put it down. She walked outside. The summer afternoon was the same it had been every afternoon for the past several weeks, hot and bright and full of the ordinary sounds of a city going about its business. She stood on the steps of the Capitol building and looked at the street and breathed. She felt Samuel beside her before she heard him. "It'll take months," he said. "The prosecution, the case reviews for the 12 families, the formal challenges to the foreclosure records." He paused. "It won't be fast." "It doesn't need to be fast," she said. "It needs to be right." "Your father said the same thing, almost exactly." She smiled, small and real and complicated. "I told you I was his daughter." They stood together on the steps for a moment in the afternoon heat. "What do you do now?" Samuel asked. She had been thinking about that. She had been thinking about it in the spaces between everything else, between the documents and the testimony, and the long, quiet rides, turning it over the way you turned over a decision you'd already made but hadn't said out loud yet. "I'm going back to Fredericksburg," she said. "There are families on that ledger who don't know yet that their cases are going to be reviewed. Someone needs to find them and tell them. Someone needs to help them navigate the challenge process when the time comes." She paused. "My father spent 30 years being the only honest person in rooms full of powerful men. I think the least I can do is make myself useful in rooms full of people who need someone to fight for them." Samuel looked at her. "That'll take years," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "You'll be fighting people who know how to fight back." "I know. You'll need resources, legal contacts, people in the right positions who can—" "Samuel," she said. He stopped. She looked at him directly, the way she'd looked at him in the tack house and in the basement in Norwood, and across Thomas Caldwell's kitchen table, the way she'd been looking at him since the first morning in the yard, when he'd turned around and given her the full quality of his attention. And she'd known somewhere, she hadn't been ready to name, that this was not an ordinary man. "Are you trying to find a reason to stay involved?" she said. "Or are you asking me whether you're allowed to—" He was quiet for a moment. "Both," he said. "Then the answer to both is yes," she said. He looked at her with that expression, the one that had started as careful assessment and traveled over the course of 2 weeks and one federal proceeding into something that had no more interest in being managed. "Your father was right about you," he said. "He was right about most things," she said. "Except the part where he thought keeping me in the dark was the same as keeping me safe." She paused. "He was wrong about that, but I forgive him for it." Samuel nodded slowly. "He asked me once," he said, "what I would do when it was over, when the case was built and Hawthorne was brought down. I told him I hadn't thought that far." He paused. "He said that was my problem. He said I was so focused on fighting the thing in front of me that I'd forgotten to decide what I was fighting toward." Abigail looked at him. "What are you fighting toward?" she said. He looked back at her for a long moment, steady and certain, and no longer guarded in the particular way he had been guarded since she arrived. "I'm still deciding," he said. "But I'm beginning to think it involves Fredericksburg." She held his gaze. Then she looked out at the Richmond street, the ordinary afternoon, the city moving the summer heat, pressing down on all of it with the indifferent persistence of a season that had no opinion about what had just happened inside that building. 12 families were going to get their land back. A 10-year fraud was going to be named in federal record publicly permanently, where no one could unname it. And Elias Reed, who had spent 30 years being the most honest man in every room he walked into, who had taught his daughter to confirm the evidence against the thing she already believed, who had written 3 shaking lines in the last letter he ever sent her, was going to be the reason for all of it. She reached into her inside pocket and took out the letter. She read it one more time, standing on the steps of the Virginia State Capitol building in the summer of 1818, with the man her father had trusted beside her, and justice finally on the record. Abigail. If anything happens to me before we speak, go to Blackwood Ridge. Ask for no one. Trust no one. Find the ledger." And at the bottom pressed hard enough to nearly tear through the paper, Victor Hawthorne. She folded the letter. She put it back in her pocket. She was going to keep it there for the rest of her life, not as a wound, and not as a reminder of what had been taken, but as proof of what one honest man's work could do when a brave woman carried it the rest of the way home. The truth had not needed powerful friends. It had only needed her,